Mandy Friedman here, licensed professional clinical counselor, clinically certified domestic violence counselor, clinically certified trauma professional level 2, and the creator of SNAP, Survivors of Narcissistic and Abusive Personalities. We are back talking about Succession, season 2. We're going to talk about the group dynamics today and the sharks. We've talked about each of the key players and characters so far in season 2, and now we're going to put them all together for the most complicated and yet most interesting parts of this show. And we're here with Andrew, my brother, who's amazing and awesome and helps me so much with this, helping me put this together. And I just want to say thank you, Andrew, for all your help with this.
You're welcome, Mandy. And I'm happy to be here to talk about season 2, the group dynamics, because we get to talk about Boar on the floor today, which is maybe one of the most infamous scenes from Succession. And if you don't know anything about that, you're about to learn. So let's start out by kind of breaking down all these little groups that we have within the big group. So the big group is basically everyone who's vying for succession. But within that, there's smaller groups.
And we can look at our own family systems this way. We can look at our own lives this way. One of the main reasons we are approaching this topic and using Succession as an example is to highlight narcissistically abusive family systems and how they work. They're characters on a TV show. We can be a little bit more emotionally detached, but this happens in the lives of real people. And it's complicated and it's difficult to describe if you haven't experienced it yourself. But we have all these different domains and arenas that come together to form a narcissistically abusive system, whether that's within a corporation or within a family or within a church. So if you picture your own family, your family history, also the histories of the people that interact with your family. So people that have married into the family, they're not necessarily blood relatives. But now let's talk about where you work and the people that you interact with there and the people that affect them and how they interact with you and the systems that go on at your workplace. Then we have your social system with your friendships and how that works out. We have extended family systems. Then we have the environments. You have your childhood home. Again, you have your workplace. We have a school setting. We have a church setting. There's lots of places where these kinds of things go on. Now, in the lives of the Roy family, we have a yacht. We have Turnhaven, the estate of Nan Pierce. We have the corporate offices, which looks like it's probably, in New York, Manhattan somewhere. We have the homes that each individual person is in. We have the children of Kendall. We have his ex-wife, Rava. So that's just the family and where they're hanging out, right? Now we bring in the people that are interacting with them that are also trying to climb the ladder to the succession. We have the executives. Those are the people like Carl and Jerry and Frank. We have people like Marcia or Willa, who are kind of marrying into the situation. We also have the shareholders, and those are the people that are calling the shots to some degree and how they play a part here. So it's very complicated. There are many players, there are many environments, there's a history, and there's a future. And much of this is about controlling what happens in the future.
When we talk about all these different groups, you did a good job of kind of explaining how they're all kind of like a big, giant, complicated Venn diagram. Because if you're talking about your work, well, that might overlap with family. And in this case, it's all overlapping. And, we have all these different groups, the executives, the family and all that stuff, but they all interact together and they all overlap in succession. When it comes to all these different situations going on, overlapping, it gets really complicated. And we're going to break down a few of them today. One of the folks that is brought back into the group dynamic in this particular season is Frank. Now, Frank gets immediately love bombed by Logan, right, Mandy?
We see Logan doing his thing, how he reels people back in. He's love bombing Frank. He gives him a watch. And the watch has a quote. As Frank opens it up, he immediately knows the quote and the rest of the quote and says the whole thing. And it's a Shakespeare quote. Now, we know that Logan must need Frank for something, because that's the only reason that he would reel people back in, was when he needs to use them to his advantage.
In this case, Logan needs Frank because he wants to acquire this giant media company called Pierce. The folks that work at Pierce are very well read. They're very studious. They love Shakespeare. Frank loves Shakespeare. The quote on the watch is Shakespeare. And Logan manipulates Frank into being his meat puppet immediately by putting half of the quote on the watch, whereas Frank sees it and continues the quote, and Logan knows, I got this guy.
Perfect example of the devaluing and discard pattern of the narcissistically abusive relationships, where we lift someone up and then we drop them, and then we make them our bestie and then we ghost them. You're in and then you're out. You're never in between. You're in or you're out. You're with us or you're against us.
The whole group goes on a boar hunting expedition. All right. This is a disgusting thing that they do. And just to describe what boar hunting is like for billionaires, is that all of these folks that are vying for succession, we even meet a few new folks that we're not really familiar with that get manipulated during this whole thing. They are there to hunt boar. And the way that boar are hunted by billionaires is that basically a group of like boars are just pushed in front of the people waiting to shoot them. And so you have these guys up in towers looking down on the boar, and they easily can kill them. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, and we are going to go over the top with wildlife metaphors to explain wildlife metaphors in this.
I love what you said a minute ago about shooting fish in a barrel. It was really gross, actually, to see that. The animals are corralled into an area. There's no cover. Who could miss at this point? It's really gross. Logan is on his own hunt, and he's going to be shooting fish in a barrel as well, as he sequesters everyone for this really crazy night where he wants to play a game called Boar on the Floor. Now, when it first starts off, it's almost like watching, like a train wreck. Like, is this it? Oh, you really can't believe it's happening. It just gets worse and worse. But essentially, he pulls a stunt that he likely learned from experiencing it himself at some stage. He probably learned this through his own experiences of enduring treatment like this as a child. Maybe he, as a child, was forced to play Boar on the Floor with his siblings. Or maybe he was part of a fraternity that liked to do hazing, and that this was some sort of a hazing tactic. But wherever it is that he learned it, he's shooting fish in a barrel himself, trying to find the traitor, the rat, who spoke with the biographer.
Yeah, these folks are all stuck in this room. And even at one point, Logan says, nobody leaves. And a guy has to pee. And it's a guy we don't really know. And he's like, go pee in that bucket. But then Logan does the thing that all narcissists do and goes, oh, I was just kidding. Manipulating everyone and scaring the shit out of them. So the rules of the game, Boar on the Floor, are made up on the fly by him. And the idea is that if you tell the truth, you are fine. You're safe, right? But like what happens is that Logan immediately gets his fish in the barrel, right? He knows, like, just by talking to these people and screaming at them and the way they react to his questions, he knows what's going on. And he isolates Tom and Greg pretty easily. And Greg is fucked. So Greg is the one who talked to the biographer, right? So he's terrified. But it all kind of works out for him.
Amazingly, Kendall has access to Roman's phone, and that's because they collected the phones. But Kendall had access. He went through Roman's phone, and he found evidence that Roman had been talking to the biographer. So Greg, by the skin of his teeth, does not get found out, and instead we're now pointing the finger at Roman, which really suits Kendall quite well, because Kendall, even though, he's kind of the bitch boy right now, he still has his sights set on succession. He still wants to be the CEO, and he's still in competition with Shiv, and he's still in competition with Roman. That is the group dynamic of their family, is that that's their love language, is competition. They are not here to support each other, help each other. They are here to take each other out. And so Kendall offers his brother up on a silver platter.
It's a great example of the Venn diagram thing we were talking about earlier, where within this room, if we want to call the physical room one circle, there's a little tiny circle that is, Roman and Kendall specifically. Then there's a little slightly bigger circle that's Roman, Kendall, and Logan. Then there's another circle that's just the three kids. And then, and it goes on and on and on. But this is a great example of the smaller circle, example right here within the bigger circle.
I just want to take a moment and reflect on this normalized abuse. Notice how no one's saying anything or doing anything. It's almost like they just act like it's not happening. That's what it's like in narcissistically abusive family systems. We just pretend like it's not going on, and then it becomes normalized through gaslighting, controlling the narrative. They were doing things like the dog pound game, Boar on the floor. Then there's the baseball game where they tell the kid to hit a home run and he'll win $1 million. Mo Lester, the wolf pack. All of these things that make it culturally appropriate within the group to abuse people, to use them as footstools. This is normalized abuse.
One of the other dynamics we want to talk about is the dynamics surrounding Rhea, who, has been kind of selected by Logan to maybe be a successor. We're not sure. She also could be someone who's going to be a lackey, who's going to be a fall guy. Marcia plants a seed of sabotage, and so do the children.
So Rhea is moving in. She is climbing the ladder, and she's now the magical person with Logan. Notice how he'll have someone that's his magic person at any given moment. Sometimes it's Shiv, sometimes it's Roman. Marcia is savvy. She is smart. She is cunning. Logan even refers to this and saying that she's got her own games that she's playing. He's mentioned before. So we know that Rhea is spending a lot of time with Logan. Also, Marcia has been treated like she's just like everybody else. When he calls everybody in and says, know your role and here's what we're doing, he lines Marcia up right alongside everybody. And that really pisses her off. And now she sees that he spent a lot of time with Rhea. So Rhea also has been talking to Logan pretty freely and openly about what she thinks about the kids. He's asked her, what is your opinion? I want to know. What do you think about Kendall? What do you think about Shiv as CEO? Do they have it in them? And she says about Shiv, she's not as smart as she thinks she is. That Shiv is really not that smart, but thinks she's a genius. And that with, Kendall, that, he every time he shits the bed, you just change the diaper, like in other words, that he can do no wrong and he'll just continue shitting the bed. As she has said these things about the kids, they're starting to get competitive vibes from her and wanting to take her out. And they start planting seeds, like you mentioned, of sabotage, including that Logan loves surprise parties. Let's do a surprise party for Logan. But as it turns out, Logan hates surprises, hates surprise parties, and would be the worst thing to do if you knew him a little better. But she doesn't. And she's really being circled by the sharks here. They're coming after her. Everybody's coming in for the kill. And she has no defense. She's completely vulnerable. She doesn't have the information. She doesn't have the insight. She doesn't know who she's dealing with, really. If she did, I think she would have been playing her cards a little closer to her chest, but her own ego and her own desires to rise up the corporate ladder, that winds up really biting her in the ass, as it turns out in the end, that her own ego and her own desires then make her blind to the fact that she is being manipulated at every turn.
Marcia tells her a great way to kind of get, in the good graces of Logan would be to talk about his sister. Now, we don't know the details of why this is, but Logan doesn't want to talk about his sister. It's a subject you do not bring up. So Marcia is sabotaging Rhea, and when Rhea does a toast, she's like, oh, if your sister would have been here, and it blows up immediately in her face. And what does Logan do?
He walks out. He's pissed. Now, I also want to mention that something else that Rhea is doing wrong here is not only are these particular things actually, triggers for him, that he doesn't like surprises and let's not talk about his sister Rose, but also we don't do touchy-feely. We don't do this sort of like, I know, let's something that appeals to Logan's sense of nostalgia, or that, to his emotional self, that anyone could be like, oh, that's really meaningful and sweet, that you would mention something that goes deep for Logan. He doesn't want anyone to know what goes deep for him. He doesn't want to talk about real things or have meaningful moments or emotional moments. So not only did she do wrong by setting up the surprise party and mentioning Rose, but she also did wrong by trying to make this something that would appeal to his emotional side. Now Logan is pissed, which means that Rhea is going to be discarded. Yet again, we see that cycle of bringing you in, reeling you in, bringing you close, then devaluing, and then discarding. Rhea just went from somebody he wants to sleep with to someone he doesn't want to have anything to do with, just like that. I mentioned a second ago how that Rhea had been giving her 2 cents to Logan about the kids, and she mentioned that Shiv was not as smart as she thinks that she is. As Logan is discarding Rhea, who does he pull in? He pulls Shiv back in. How? He says, you're smart. He's having this moment with Shiv like, I think your dad might have made a mistake. I think I might have messed up. I don't know if I handled this right. I don't think he's truly going to her to admit he did something wrong or that he messed up. I think that he's trying to save face. I think that if he goes to the kids or goes to Shiv and says, oh, I was thinking with my dick, that they're going to be like, oh, yeah, I see what you mean. Instead of, boy, Dad, you really screwed the pooch here, didn't ya? You really did fuck us all over by, thinking with your dick. He doesn't want to be embarrassed. So instead, what does he do? He appeals to the emotionalities of things that, oh, I messed up. And Shiv's like, oh, gosh, Dad never says that to me. It's like when somebody that never, ever apologizes finally apologizes. And then you think, oh, that must have meant something. It didn't mean shit. It's just they needed a different tactic to get you back on board. Same thing here. He compliments her intelligence. He seems like he's being transparent and open with her in just this split second of their relationship, and she gobbles it right up.
And really, he's just replacing the human shield that was Rhea. Like, he's got an army of people waiting to get in the way of bullets and slings and arrows and all that, right? And so his female shield was gone, so he needed another one. So here we are. Shiv is being pulled in again, and we see the beginning of the cycle with Shiv again. And what's great is that a lot of times we see the complete cycle over and over again on this show. We just saw the beginning of one with Frank. We're seeing the end, or the beginning of one with Shiv again here. We'll see the end of them later. This is part of Logan's skill at rallying the troops. And when he gets everyone together, it's the folks that do well in these high pressure situations, locked into a room with him. He knows he can either count on them, or how they act reveals, if they're a rat or if they're someone that he can't trust.
And I just want to emphasize even more what, in terms of rallying the troops, I'm going to also call it circling the wagons. One thing that narcissistically abusive systems are really, really good at is circling the wagons, much like Logan is really, really, really good at rallying the troops. When we circle the wagons, that means we're protecting the group, we're protecting the family. And that could be at your expense, at your cost. You could be the one who was abused and say, hey, Uncle so-and-so did such and such to me, and I don't want to go to Thanksgiving if he's going to be there. Well, then I guess you're not coming to Thanksgiving. Nobody cares. And in fact, that you're not there, we're going to mischaracterize why you're not there. It's because you're crazy, you're difficult, you're overly sensitive, you got some crazy therapist in your ear, all kinds of ways that it gets mischaracterized when somebody finally speaks up to try to do something about it, and then the group circles the wagons, and now we have, what do we call it? A black sheep. Yet another another wildlife metaphor. There's a reason why there are lots of wildlife metaphors. And that's because these individuals navigate relationships and circumstances with a survival mentality of me, mine, more, now. I'm entitled because I am. That will wind up with those types of behaviors where you are in like wildlife. It's about survival, the survival of the fittest, who is genetically predisposed to succeed, and it doesn't matter what you leave in your wake as long as you wind up on top.
During this whole situation, Roman's worried about him and says, "Hey, aren't you worried about all this news that's coming in?" And he says, "Roman, I got an army of people that it's their job to know these things." And we see the army of people working right next door. Now, Logan gets a call and he learns that the shareholders want him to go down for the cruise stuff, right? That's what their ideal, situation is. And he's the only one that knows that. And he uses that information as a weapon.
He does. He keeps that close to his chest. He does not share that with the people closest to him. And instead, he decides that he is going to sequester everyone yet again to figure out how he can put up another human shield. They did not say that they needed another head on a spike. That's not what was said in the conversation. It was, "You would do," is what they said. "You'll be fine. If we have you, that's all we need." But the way he translates that to everyone else is, they mentioned me, but they also need another head on a spike too. Lie, not true.
What Logan's trying to accomplish there is, I like to call it a bed of nails. All right. He's trying to, even out the pressure. So when someone lays on a bed of nails, yes, there's all these spikes, but because the pressure is evened out throughout their entire body, it doesn't pierce them. And so he is going to use other people as his, bed of nails, so to speak, to protect him and spread out any of this blame. So it's not on him.
Exactly. Yet another thing that these types are really good at is figuring out a way that they cannot have blood on their hands, and they can point and blame shift and go, "Well, hold on. You said this was a good, in fact, I think this was your idea, wasn't it?" And everybody in the room will go, "Oh yeah, that was his idea," even though it wasn't. It's like blame shifting is huge. We need to be able to point the finger, but in order to point the finger at someone, we have to set them up and position them first so that they can receive that finger point.
At this point, Frank finds out that he's not a real person in the eyes of Logan and the family. And this is a hierarchy thing that we've been talking about throughout, where the hierarchy in the business is different than the hierarchy in the family. And not only that, but it's just like nature, just like you were talking about.
It's life on the Serengeti. And Frank gets reeled in. And at a certain point, as he's starting to jockey for position, it is mentioned, "No, you're not real." And like Andrew mentioned at the beginning of this episode, the hierarchy, the Venn diagram, the circles, you could be in a circle, but not in this one. You might be in this circle, but you're not in this circle. And Frank's figuring that out, that just now after he gets reeled back in, he's already being devalued and told that he's not a real person. In this environment, he's not real. But he can speak about the cruise line victims and conceptualize them as being not real people. So do you see the hierarchy there? It's just as long as you're not on the bottom. It's just as long as someone is below you. That's what matters. And it will matter in a family when there's just a wife, a mom, and kids. There's your hierarchy. It's who can I step on in my home? Who makes me feel powerful in my little immediate family here? Or it's a CEO who is using and abusing power at the highest levels on the globe. But it's the same mannerisms, the same attitudes, the same mistreatment and abuse that goes on. It's just different.
And Frank is like a foraging animal that has made friends with the lion pack and thinks it's part of the lion pack, but really it's not a lion, right? So he's finding out that these hierarchies are enforceable and they're very real. Now, you mentioned that as long as you're above everyone else, and what a great way to wrap this up, because at the end of the season, we have Logan looking out over the water from, the giant boat, the yacht, and wondering, if the sharks circling below will eat him.
I'd like to mention the quote. So he's looking out over the water. Kendall approaches him and says, "So it's going to get choppy." And Logan says, "I can't fucking believe it." And a side note, they never believe they're caught ever. Me? I never did anything really. A good Catholic lad who couldn't even take his undershirt off in front of his wife, his ex-wife, whatever the fuck she is, me, all the rest behave like a pack of fucking stray dogs. He can't take any responsibility. None. He's even going back to his childhood. I was a good Catholic lad. Well, talking about circling the wagons, the Catholic Church is probably one of the hugest entities that are the best at covering up their crimes. So good Catholic boy, debatable, right? Boar on the floor, whatever. But the part where he says he couldn't even take his shirt off in front of his wife, now ex-wife. The reason that he can't take his shirt off is because he feels shame over the scars that he has on his back. He can't show anyone that. He's just hiding the abuse. He thinks that it makes him look weak and that he comes from filth, instead of seeing it as, this is something I went through, something I don't want to pass on to my children, something I would like to help other people with, that maybe of my billions of dollars that I could, invest in helping people recover from abuse. Some people take their abusive backgrounds and they do good with it, but he can't even take his shirt off. That's how deeply buried this is going to be. As Logan is looking down on the water and realizing that he might be caught, you can't help but to picture him thinking about the sharks, and that perhaps the sharks are circling him and that they are looking down on him. Essentially, with narcissism, that's the two directions things go. I'm either looking down on you or you are looking down on me.
To wrap up our episode, we have an amazing shot of some fishermen. So these fishermen are down in this little tiny boat. This massive behemoth of a yacht is passing them by. They are in its wake.
So the fishermen in the boat, they're the regular people, the not real people. And he's a real person, and they're not, looking down on them. And yet they're the ones that are fishing they're sustainably, I would assume, in their little boat. And they are providing for their families. They're doing what real people actually do. And what is passing them is this giant fucking disgusting display of wealth. And then in its wake is rocking the boat of the fishermen. And that's the kind of effect that people like Logan have on this world, is that they just cruise on through, not even realizing the harm that they're causing. In the meantime, the rest of the people that receive the wake have to clean up afterwards and figure out how we move on from here. If that wake were to tip the boat over, do you think Logan's going to come back and say, "Oh, I'm sorry that your boat tipped over here. Let me help you"? But no, he's not going to. They're going to have to figure that shit out themselves, whether they're going to sink or swim. That's what goes on when systems and groups are narcissistic. They don't care how they affect other people outside of the group or the people inside of the group. It's about the structure and the hierarchy and who has power over other people.
That's wrapping up season 2. Really enjoyed talking about it and getting into the nitty-gritty detail. Mandy, what are we going to cover next?
Season 3, Kendall Roy. It's going to get so exciting. There's some characters that are coming into play that we haven't seen yet. I just love Alexander Skarsgård, don't you? I don't care if he's a jerk. I still love him. Anyway, it's going to be fun. I can't wait. And it's going to be complicated, too, with everything starting to mount up as the season goes by. And thank you all for watching or listening. Bye-bye.